Story 1. The Case of the Abandoned Mansion. On the outskirts of a quiet town, perched on a lonely hill, stood an abandoned mansion that had long been a source of fear and fascination for the locals. The Blackwood Mansion, with its broken windows and ivy-covered walls, was a silent reminder of a dark past. Decades ago, the mansion had been home to a wealthy and influential family, the Blackwood, whose mysterious deaths and disappearances had become urban legends. In recent months, rumors of people disappearing near the mansion had resurfaced, prompting the local police to investigate. Detective Richard, a middle-aged man with a long career in the police force, and his partner, Detective Maria, fearless and brilliant young investigator, were assigned to the case. Both were known for their investigative skills and for taking on cases that others preferred to avoid. When they arrived at the mansion, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the imposing structure. "This place is even creepier than in the photos," said Maria, adjusting her belt with her flashlight and other gear. Richard nodded. "Let's be careful. There are many stories about this mansion, and none of them are good." With flashlights in hand, the detectives entered the mansion. The air was heavy and smelled of mold, and each step they took made the wooden floor creak under their feet. First room they explored was the living room, where old furniture was covered with white sheets, creating a ghostly atmosphere. "Let's look for any evidence of recent activity," said Richard, examining a dust-covered coffee table. Maria found an old diary on a shelf. "Look at this, Richard. This might be useful." The diary was covered in dust, and its pages were yellowed with age. When she opened it, Maria saw that the first entries dated back to the late 19th century. "It's the diary of Eliza Blackwood," she said. She was the last owner of the mansion before the tragedy. While Maria read the first pages, Richard explored the adjacent room. Suddenly, a noise from upstairs caught their attention. "Did you hear that?" Richard asked, narrowing his eyes toward the stairs. "Yes, it sounded like it came from the second floor. Let's check it out." The detectives climbed the stairs cautiously. The second floor was even more decrepit, with peeling walls and tattered carpet. They followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. When they entered, the temperature seemed to drop abruptly, and both felt a chill run down their spines. "What is this?" Maria asked, pointing to a wall covered in strange symbols and macabre drawing. Richard approached, examining the symbols carefully. "It looks like some kind of ritual. This might be the key to understanding what's happening here." Suddenly, closet door opened by itself, revealing a small, hidden passage. "This is getting stranger by the minute," Richard murmured. The detectives entered the passage, which led them to a hidden basement. The basement was large and filled with old objects, including melted candles, spell books, and more symbols on the walls. In the center was a stone altar stained with dried blood. "These rituals, they don't look like they were done long ago," Maria observed, pointing to the candles that still had fresh wax remnants. "I agree. Someone has been here recently," Richard said, looking around. "We need to find out who and why." As they explored the basement, they heard a faint moan. They followed the sound to a solid wooden door. When they opened it, they discovered a young man tied up and gagged. He was weak but alive. "Help me, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse and desperate. Maria quickly untied the young man while Richard checked the surroundings. "We're here to help. Who did this to you?" she asked. "His name is Victor. He's behind all of this. He's trying to resurrect the Blackwood spirits," the young man replied, trembling with fear. The detectives took the young man outside the basement, trying to calm him down. "We'll take you to the hospital, then come back to investigate further," Richard said. At the hospital, the young man, who introduced himself as Philip, told his story. He was a history student who had become interested in the Blackwood legend and decided to investigate on his own. "I found Victor online. He seemed to know a lot about the mansion and invited me for a visit. But when I got there, he trapped me and started talking about rituals and spirits." "Do you know where we can find Victor?" Maria asked. "He mentioned a final ritual that would be performed on the next full moon, which is tomorrow," Philip replied, eyes wide with fear. Richard and Maria knew they had to act fast. They returned to the mansion that night, determined to find Victor and stop the ritual. The mansion was even more sinister at night. shadows moving on the walls and inexplicable sounds echoing through the corridors. "We need to find the ritual site," Richard said, leading Maria back to the basement. There they found new clues indicating that the ritual would be performed at the Blackwood family cemetery, located on the grounds behind the mansion. Armed with flashlights and weapons, the detectives headed for the cemetery. The cemetery was a grim place, with old tombstones and moss-covered mausoleums. As they approached, they saw Victor beside a large tomb, murmuring words in an ancient language while lighting candles around it. "Victor, stop now," Richard shouted, pointing his gun. Victor turned, his eyes gleaming with a frenzied madness. "You can't stop what's about to happen. The Blackwoods will return and I will be rewarded." Maria tried to approach from the side, but Victor was quick. He pulled a dagger from his cloak and lunged at Richard. The two struggled, falling to the ground while Maria tried to find a way to help. "You don't understand the power at play here," Victor shouted, trying to stab Richard. Richard managed to disarm Victor, but the ritual was already in progress. The sky above them began to fill with dark clouds, and a cold wind swept through the cemetery. The candles around the tomb went out, and a spectral figure began to emerge from the ground. "It's too late," Victor exclaimed, laughing maniacally. Maria, realizing the imminent danger, grabbed the spellbook Victor had brought and began to recite a banishment incantation she had seen earlier in the basement. "Richard, keep Victor occupied. I'm going to try to end this." As Maria recited the words, the spectral figure began to waver, its form slowly disintegrating. Victor, realizing what was happening, tried to stop her, but Richard held him firmly, preventing him from getting close. Finally, with a final scream, the spectral figure disappeared, and the sky cleared. The wind stopped, and peace returned to the cemetery. Victor, defeated, fell to his knees, muttering incoherently. The detectives arrested Victor and called for reinforcements. The case was closed with Victor's arrest and the revelation of the horrors he had tried to bring back to the world. Back at the station, Richard and Maria reflected on what they had faced. "There are things in this world that we can't explain," Richard said, looking at the final report. "But at least we managed to stop the evil from prevailing," Maria replied, closing the spellbook. The experience at Blackwood Mansion left a lasting mark on the detectives, reminding them of the hidden dangers that can exist beyond human understanding. The mansion was sealed and considered a historical site. Few dared to approach it again. Story 2. The Ghost Serial Killer. In a city already grappling with the daily challenges of crime, a new and horrifying threat emerged, plunging the residents into a state of fear and paranoia. A series of brutal murders shook the community, each crime marked by the signature of a serial killer who had supposedly been executed years before. Killings were meticulously planned and executed, leaving behind a trail of terror that seemed to defy logic and reason. Detective John, a veteran of the police force known for his determination and insight, was assigned to lead the investigation. Alongside him was forensic expert Claire, a brilliant and intuitive young woman with a special talent for uncovering the darkest secrets and crimes. When the first body was found, John and Claire were called to the scene. The crime scene was a suburban house where a woman had been brutally murdered. Her body was arranged in a ritualistic manner, and a bloody message was written on the wall. "I'm back." John examined the message, his eyes narrowing. "This is impossible," he murmured. Claire approached, jotting down details in her notebook. "What do you mean, John?" "This signature. It's from a serial killer named Robert the Butcher. He was executed 10 years ago." Claire looked at John, incredulous. "You think someone is copying his crimes?" "Could be, but we need to dig deeper." Following days were intense. John and Claire revisited Robert's old case files, searching for any clues that might explain the new wave of murders. They discovered that Robert had a specific pattern in his crimes, and that all his victims were connected in some way. "We need to find out if there's a connection between the new victims and Robert," said Claire, while analyzing the evidence in the forensic lab. John agreed. "Let's interview the families of the old victims and see if we can find anything." During the interviews, they discovered that all the recent victims had some indirect connection to Robert's previous cases. Some were distant relatives, others former colleagues or acquaintances. The discovery reinforced the theory that the murders were not coincidental. One night, while reviewing the evidence in the office, John received an anonymous call. A voice on the other end was low and threatening. "You'll never catch me, detective. I'm always one step ahead." John felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "You know who I am," replied the voice before the line went dead. Claire, who was beside John, noticed his expression. "What happened?" "We just got a call from the killer. He's taunting us." Claire frowned. "That means he's watching our every move." The detectives decided to intensify the investigation. Claire re-examined the crime scenes, looking for any details that might have been missed. John interviewed Robert's former cellmates, trying to find out if anyone might be copying his crimes. That's when they received a crucial tip. One of Robert's former cellmates, a man named Michael, had recently been released. John and Claire decided to visit him. Michael lived in a modest house on the outskirts of the city. When the detectives arrived, he seemed nervous and reluctant to talk. "I don't know anything," repeated. John pressed. "Michael, we know you had a close relationship with Robert. We need your help to understand what's going on. More lives could be at risk." Michael looked at the detectives with suspicion but finally sighed, feeling the weight of guilt and fear. "Look, Robert told me many things. He had this obsession with revenge and power. Before he died, he talked about a ritual that would ensure he never really died. I thought he was crazy, but now, I don't know anymore." Claire frowned. "What kind of ritual?" Michael shrugged. "He talked about transferring his soul, his essence, to continue his work. He talked about an old spell book he found in prison." John and Claire thanked Michael and left, with a new lead to follow. Quickly researching, they discovered that Dr. Velasquez was an expert in the occult who had published several books on ancient rituals and black magic. They decided to visit him at his office. When they arrived, they were greeted by a tall, thin man with piercing eyes and an air of mystery. "Detectives, how can I help you?" Velasquez asked, indicating they should sit. John got straight to the point. "We're investigating a series of murders that seem connected to a ritual of soul transfer. Does the name Robert the Butcher mean anything to you?" Velasquez nodded slowly. "Yes, I've heard of him. A very disturbed man, and, unfortunately, very interested in my writings." Claire showed some of the evidence they had collected. "He mentioned a spell book. Do you have any idea where he might have gotten it?" Velasquez sighed. "It's possible he acquired a rare copy of the Book of Shadows, an ancient grimoire containing rituals to preserve a person's essence beyond death. If he actually performed these rituals, the results could be devastating." "How can we stop that?" Don asked, the urgency clear in his voice. Velasquez hesitated. "If he managed to transfer his essence, we need to find and destroy the object containing his soul. Without it, he can't continue." "Any idea where it might be?" Claire asked. Velasquez thought for a moment. "Objects are usually tied to places important to the person. Perhaps his old home or a significant location related to his crimes." With this new information, John and Claire began combing through Robert's old crime records, trying to identify a location that could serve as a hiding place for the object. After hours of research, they found a lead. The house where Robert had committed his first murder, now abandoned. They arrived at the location at midnight, the silence of the night broken only by the rustling of leaves and distant owl hoots. The house was in ruins, with broken windows and doors falling apart. The atmosphere was dense and filled with tension. "We have to be careful," Don said as they entered the house. The house was full of grim memories. Graffiti-covered walls, overturned furniture, and remnants of a life brutally interrupted. Claire began taking photos and documenting everything while John searched for the object. Suddenly, Claire found a small hidden room behind a bookshelf. When they entered, they saw an improvised altar with extinguished candles and an old mirror in the center. The mirror seemed to pulse with its own energy. "This must be the object," Claire said, approaching cautiously. The moment Claire touched the mirror, an invisible force threw her against the wall. John ran to help her but felt a dark presence filling the room. "You shouldn't have come here," a guttural voice echoed through the space. It was Robert's voice. John stood up, determined. "We're going to end this, Robert. You won't hurt anyone else." The fight that ensued was intense. Robert's spirit used the mirror to launch shadows and illusions, trying to confuse the detective. Claire, recovering, began to recite an incantation Velasquez had given them, trying to banish Robert's essence back to the beyond. "You have no power here," Claire shouted as the mirror began to crack. John held the mirror firmly. "Let's finish this." The final effort, Claire completed the incantation, and the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. The dark presence disappeared, and the air lightened. The detectives collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. "Is it over?" John asked, helping Claire up. "Yes, we finished him," she replied with a sigh of relief. The detectives left the house, taking the evidence to the station. Case was closed, and the city could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Robert the Butcher had been permanently stopped, and his malevolent essence was banished forever. Back at the office, John and Claire reflected on the investigation. "There are things in this world that go beyond our understanding," John said, looking out the window. "But at least we managed to stop the evil from prevailing," Claire replied, closing the final file. The experience left a lasting mark on the detectives, reminding them of the hidden dangers that can exist beyond human understanding. They returned to work, more determined than ever to protect their city from the horrors lurking in the shadows. Story 3. The Haunted Hotel Mystery. In the heart of an old city full of history, there was a luxurious hotel now steeped in dark legends and reports of paranormal activity. The Grand Hotel Belmont, once a symbol of opulence and elegance, had become infamous for its tragedies and mystery. Guests reported unexplained noises, whispers in the dark, and ghostly apparitions. More recently, a series of unexplained disappearances heightened the fear and curiosity surrounding the hotel. Detective Luke, an experienced man with a skeptical eye, was assigned to investigate the disappearances. He knew he would need help to understand the supernatural events, so he called Bianca, a renowned paranormal investigator known for her skills in dealing with the unknown. Together, they were determined to uncover the secrets of the Grand Hotel Belmont. When they arrived at the hotel, they were greeted by the manager, Mr. Henderson, a nervous man clearly disturbed by the recent events. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, leading them to the main lobby. "The hotel has been agitated, to say the least." Luke looked around, observing the place's decaying grandeur. "Can you tell us more about the disappearances?" "The first disappearance happened about a month ago," Henderson began, his eyes darting nervously around the lobby. "A guest simply vanished without a trace. Since then, 2 more people have disappeared. Security cameras show nothing, and no one saw or heard anything unusual." Bianca closed her eyes for a moment, trying to sense the energy of the place. "There's a very strong presence here," she said finally. "Let's start with the room of the first missing person." Room 217 was one of the hotel's best, overlooking the city's main square. When they entered, Luke and Bianca immediately felt an oppressive sensation. The air was cold, and a faint smell of mold permeated the room. Bianca began unpacking her equipment, including an EMF meter and a night vision camera. "Let's see what we find here." While Bianca examined the room, Luke began asking Mr. Henderson about the missing guests. Did they have anything in common? Any strange behavior before they disappeared? Henderson shook his head. "Nothing I can remember. They were all regular guests, here for business or tourism." Suddenly, Bianca's EMF meter started flashing intensely. "I'm getting a strong reading here," she said, moving toward the closet. When she opened the closet door, Bianca found an old diary hidden in the back. "This could be important," she said, handing the diary to Luke. Luke flipped through the yellowed pages, finding entries from a guest who had stayed over 50 years ago. The entries spoke of strange dreams and a dark figure that appeared every night. "He mentions a figure that tormented him in his dreams," Luke read aloud from one of the entries. "Maybe we're dealing with an entity that has haunted this hotel for a long time." Bianca nodded. "We need to do a full sweep of the hotel. Are there more rooms we should investigate?" Henderson led them to the other 2 rooms where the disappearances had occurred. In each one, Bianca found evidence of paranormal activity, high EMF levels, sudden temperature changes, and in one room, an old mirror that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. "This mirror, I feel a strong presence coming from it," Bianca said, touching the cold frame. Luke took notes, trying to keep a logical mind amidst the inexplicable events. We need to find out the origin of this mirror. It could be the key to understanding what's happening here. Back in the lobby, Luke and Bianca requested access to the hotel's historical records. Henderson led them to the archive, a small room full of documents and old photos. They spent hours sifting through yellowed papers and faded photographs until they found an important clue. "Look at this," Luke said, showing a photo to Bianca. "This mirror has been in the hotel since it opened, over 100 years ago. Belonged to the founder, Victor Belmont." "Is there anything about Victor Belmont?" Bianca asked, picking up another pile of documents. Luke found an old newspaper article. Victor Belmont died a tragic death. He was found dead in his office, and many believe he was involved in the occult. Bianca frowned. If Victor was involved in the occult, he could have cast some kind of spell on the mirror. Maybe his soul is trapped in it. That would explain the disappearances and the apparitions, Luke said thoughtfully. "We need to check Victor's office. Where is it, Henderson?" "The office is still intact," Henderson replied, visibly nervous. "No one has gone in there for years. It's on the top floor." They climbed the creaky stairs to the top floor, where they found the door to Victor Belmont's office. Door was locked, but Henderson handed the key to Luke. "Good luck," he murmured. Victor Belmont's office was a place of nightmares. The walls were covered with strange symbols and ritualistic objects. In the center of the room was a dark wooden desk with a large open spellbook. Bianca began examining the book while Luke searched for more clues. "This book contains rituals for summoning and controlling spirits," Bianca said, reading the pages. "Victor was trying to achieve immortality. He might have succeeded in some way," Luke said, finding a safe embedded in the wall. "Let's see what we have here." Inside the safe, they found more documents and a small wooden box. When they opened the box, they discovered an old amulet, pulsing with a sinister energy. "This amulet could be the key to controlling the entity," Bianca said. "We need to use it to break the spell and free the trapped souls." Luke and Bianca returned to the lobby, where they began preparing a banishment ritual. With the amulet and the spell book, Bianca drew a protection circle on the floor. "Let's end this once and for all," she said determinedly. As Bianca recited the incantation, the temperature in the lobby dropped dramatically. Cold winds swept through the space, and the lights began to flicker. A spectral figure appeared before them, its eyes glowing with ancient fury. "Who dares challenge me?" the figure shouted, voice echoing through the hotel. "Victor Belmont, you don't belong in this world." Bianca replied, holding the amulet firmly. "Release the souls you've imprisoned and return to where you belong." Figure advanced, but the protection circle prevented it from getting closer. Bianca continued reciting the incantation, voice firm and clear. The figure began to writhe, letting out a cry of agony. Luke held the spellbook, helping Bianca complete the ritual. "We're almost there, keep going," he encouraged. With a final cry, the figure disappeared, and the lobby fell silent. The heavy energy that had filled the hotel dissipated, and the temperature returned to normal. "We did it," Bianca said, exhausted but relieved. "Victor Belmont is banished, and the souls are free." Luke nodded, a relieved smile on his face. "Let's make sure nothing like this ever happens again." In the following days, the hotel was temporarily closed for renovations and spiritual cleansing. Luke and Bianca were thanked and praised for their courage and determination in solving the mystery. The Grand Hotel Belmont eventually reopened, but the legend of the dark events was never forgotten. Luke and Bianca continued their careers, more united and determined than ever to protect the city from the horrors lurking in the shadows. The experience at the hotel marked them deeply, reminding them that evil can hide in the most unexpected places, and that courage and determination are essential to face the unknown.